Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us for this very special webinar of our National Housing Crisis Task Force. I'm Mary Ellen Wiederwohl. I'm the President and CEO of Accelerator for America. We're a national nonprofit organization that works with city leaders across the country, finding and developing the best innovations and solutions working in our cities, and then sharing those across the nation. We're really thrilled this afternoon to be highlighting one of the major bodies of work that we've been committed to for the last year and a half, and that is our National Housing Crisis Task Force. Accelerator for America teamed up with Bruce Katz and his team at the Drexel University NOAC Metro Finance Lab a little over a year ago to help bring together this bipartisan cross-sectoral task force to address one of the biggest challenges facing state and local leaders everywhere across the U.S. You can't sit with a mayor or a governor or anybody who works near him without talking about housing these days. You say, what are your top three issues? You're going to hear housing in one, two, or three, or maybe one, two, and three top issues for you. And so we knew that we needed to come together across party lines and across whether it's capital, construction, land use, all of the pieces that come together to help make housing possible, to come up with some new solutions and to surface those amazing innovations that state and local leaders have already been practicing and perfecting across the country. So this afternoon, we're going to talk about some of those great innovations. We're going to kick off with Ben Price, who was leading our National Housing Crisis Task Force in its first year, and he's going to share with us the primary components of the State and Local Housing Action Plan, which includes 15 innovations, tried and tested, that we're hoping many of you will begin implementing in your communities. After Ben goes through the toolkit for us and gives us an overview of that, we're going to have a really exciting panel, including three of our four co-chairs. Today, we are joined by Governor Spencer Cox from Utah, Mayor Justin Bibb from Cleveland, and President of the Fifth Third Bank Community Development Corporation, Susan Thomas. We are missing our other favorite co-chair, Mayor Andre Dickens, but if you've read our local housing action plan, then the innovations from Atlanta will be with us throughout this conversation today, even if he is not. So once again, thank you for giving your time, particularly those of you on the East Coast for whom it is already 5 o'clock. For those of you in the other time zones, we're happy for you to finish out your day with us. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben Price to give us an overview of the State and Local Housing Action Plan and looking forward to the discussion that follows. Ben?
Thank you, Mary Ellen, and thank you everyone for joining us today. Really thrilled to see the turnout that we have on this webinar. So the work of the National Housing Crisis Task Force really only began around 18 months ago. We formally launched in July of 2024 with a group of bipartisan practitioners from across the country. Our argument was that the housing crisis has grown to such a proportion that state and local leaders were taking into their own hands a set of solutions to address the crisis in their communities. The federal government obviously responded to the great financial crisis and responded to the acute crisis during the COVID pandemic. But the breadth and depth of the housing crisis had reached beyond the coast and had really reached beyond the set of contours of tools that we had, the tools that we had largely around the 20th century housing policy. And so we brought together 28 task force members, our four co-chairs, as Mary Ellen said, the governor of Utah, the mayors of Atlanta and Cleveland, and the president of Fifth Third Bank CDC, and then 24 additional task force members meant to represent all parts of the housing ecosystem: public sector, private sector, philanthropic sector, civic sector. And so our 24 task force members are leaders in the field, representing housing finance agencies, public housing authorities, investors, developers, architecture, engineering, really all of the pieces that it takes in order to build the housing that we live in across the country. And we interviewed all of our task force members right from the beginning and asked them, what are the innovations that you are seeing in the housing ecosystem today? Who are the fast movers and quick followers who are building new products, building new processes, implementing new programs in order to address the housing crisis in their communities? And so from that initial set of interviews that we conducted last summer, we continued to engage the entire housing ecosystem as well. We met with the national trade associations to hear what their members were focused on and how their members were innovating. We met with people across the country, really trying to understand what are the new things that are happening, recognizing that there are many solutions, many good ideas to the housing crisis, many of which have been cataloged in toolkits and playbooks from friends of ours in the housing ecosystem already. But we're really focused on those new innovations. And the innovations that we settled on were in 5 different categories: land, capital, construction, regulation and governance, and regulation policy and governance. And our argument here is that in order to build and preserve housing, different parts of the housing ecosystem all need to be engaged, right? In order to build a house or an apartment, you need to make sure that there's available land. You need to make sure that there's financing available to actually construct that unit. There's a construction process that happens using innovative construction techniques or the existing methods that we have. All of it happens in a regulatory environment, dealing with land use, dealing with building codes, as well as our whole innovation industrial sector. And then you have the governance, right? Who are the actual players at the table in a jurisdiction or in a region or in a state that are able to work together and work collaboratively in order to build the sorts of housing that we want to build. And so from these 5 categories, we set to identify 2 to 3 innovations in each of these categories. Many of them are drawn from task force members, right? We chose the task force members because we were impressed with what they were doing in their communities. And we think that much of what they're doing is worth diffusing and scaling throughout the country. We also identified these innovations based on the extent to which they were impactful, as well as their ability to diffuse and scale. We wanted to make sure that what was happening in one place could actually work in tens or hundreds of communities across the country, and that they would make sense in housing markets as diverse as Atlanta and Cleveland or Sacramento and Scranton. We recognize that the housing crisis looks different in these different communities. And so we needed to identify a set of tools that could address the different crises that we have, the high cost, hot markets, as well as the markets that are largely dealing with vacancy and blight and a more struggling housing market. And our argument is that in a given community, all of the players need to work together. You have the state, you have county governments, you have local governments, and then you have local philanthropy, all of which can commit to action in coordination with developers, labor, capital providers, and communities, since we know that ultimately it's the private sector that builds almost all of the housing that we have in this country. And so the State and Local Housing Action Plan is largely geared towards that public and civic sector, what states can do and what localities can do, but in collaboration with that private sector that builds and manages the housing that we ultimately live in. And so from this process of interviewing task force members and interviewing practitioners from across the country, we settled on 15 tools in the State and Local Housing Action Plan. In land, we talked about municipal property advisors and public asset corporations, really focused on how the public sector can use the assets that they own in order to build the housing that we need. We recognize that we are in a housing crisis. One way that states and locals can treat the crisis like a crisis is by building housing on its land in collaboration with developers for a range of affordable and market rate housing developments. We have a number of tools in the capital vertical, because at the end of the day, what you need in order to build housing largely comes down to money. And so we focus on local tools for affordability, property tax abatements in order to ensure that the public sector and private sector have matching return expectations, housing production funds, learning about what has happened in Montgomery County and has spread and scaled to places like Chattanooga, Atlanta, and Chicago, working with community foundations to do impact investing and really drive that civic sector engagement in the housing ecosystem, public-private collaboration, learning from a task force member out of the Housing Accelerator Fund in San Francisco, really thinking about how philanthropy can unlock the construction of housing units. And then learning from our Utah co-chair, Governor Cox, with investments in starter homes, and really trying to think about not just the rental space, but making sure that families and individuals can have a place to call their own that they own, and thinking about how the public sector capital can unlock that. On construction innovation, we focus both on modular pre-purchasing and thinking about offsite construction, as well as building for insurability and resilience, and making sure that the housing that we have can be housing that lasts for the long term. Regulation, we think about land use, building code, and permitting reform, right? What are the best practices out there for states and localities to make sure that their regulatory regime encourages a bias towards building, as well as regulatory reform for industrialized construction, recognizing the fact that we have a fragmented regulatory regime that makes offsite and innovative construction methods really difficult to implement and scale. And then finally, on governance, we write about housing strike forces, the organizing principle that Mayor Dickens used to organize around housing goals in Atlanta, statewide capital organizing, thinking about how to bring together the players to use tax advantage capital like opportunity zones in the use of housing, and then housing command centers, learning from places like Cleveland with Mayor Bibb to organize differently around homelessness solutions. And so we'll drop a link in the chat, although if you're on this webinar, or you're certainly familiar with the State and Local Housing Action Plan. But this is just the beginning. We're working with Accelerator for America to implement these tools in a set of communities. And we hope that those of you on this call today can also take the innovative tools in the State and Local Housing Action Plan and think through what problems they can solve in your own housing markets and how they can be translated from tools in a 200-page long document to a set of roadmaps and action plans in your own community. And so with that, I'm going to pass it to Colin Higgins, the new executive director of the task force, who's going to be moderating a conversation with our co-chairs here today.
Thanks, Ben, and thanks, Mary Ellen, for introducing this panel. And I would ask the co-chairs, in addition to Mayor Bibb, if you're online, to jump on the screen. I know some of our co-chairs are running to and from meetings, and so maybe a couple minutes late. And so as we are waiting for them, I want to just quickly introduce myself and then do a quick around the horn with a question to our co-chairs who are on. But my name is Colin Higgins. As Ben mentioned, I am the new executive director of the National Housing Crisis Task Force as of a couple months ago, and sort of taking the charge of helping to implement what we see as these 15 innovations that are emerging around the country, and sort of scale and diffuse them as we think about setting the North Star for where housing policy ought to be headed in this country. And so with that, I actually want to turn it to our co-chairs to sort of introduce themselves, but with the question of, right, like we have Mayor Bibb from Cleveland and Susan Thomas, president of Fifth Third CDC, who sit at a mayor and a lender. And from where you all sit, what do you see as one or two policy levers that states or cities or you could pull that would drive immediate progress to increasing housing supply and affordability? And Governor Cox is going to get the same question when he jumps on as well. So maybe Mayor Bibb, I will pass to you first to introduce yourself and talk a bit about that question.
Well, thank you, Colin, and to the entire National Housing Crisis Task Force team for having me. An honor to co-chair this task force with Governor Cox and Mayor Dickens. Again, I'm Justin Bibb, mayor of the great city of Cleveland, Ohio. And I'd say simply two things we've done immediately to really address our housing crisis in Cleveland to really drive change has been around zoning reform and permitting reform. The first thing we did was last year, for the first time in 100 years, we passed zoning reform to execute a form-based code pilot. The goal is to make sure we get that executed citywide by 2027. But in this form-based code, it gives developers, whether you're a large-scale developer like Sherwin-Williams, who built a brand new headquarters downtown, or a mid-size or small developer who's building a couple townhomes in our city, We want to give you predictability and flexible standards to make the building process more efficient, more effective, and give you that certainty that you need. The second thing I would say is streamlining our permitting efforts. As I've been saying constantly over the last couple of years, we can't let process be an impediment to prosperity. The residents that I lead every day here in Cleveland don't give a damn about how the sausage is made. They want to just see the product done and completed. They want to see cranes in the sky, shovels in the ground, and residents in homes and residents working on these projects. And so my team has been leading a massive permitting reform effort over the last year. The first phase of that work will go into effect this fall. We got to make the easy things easier. And that's a big part of what we're doing to make our housing challenges a little bit better here in Cleveland, Ohio.
All right. Thank you, Mayor Bibb. And Susan, I'm going to turn to you next as we give Governor Cox a moment to collect himself as he gets to the webinar. So same question to you. Give us a bit of who you are and one or two things from where you sit, if you really pulled the levers that could increase housing supply and affordability today.
Sure. Thank you, Colin. Thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. My name is Susan Thomas. I'm the president of the Community Development Corporation at Fifth Third Bank. So we're the entity that makes equity investments and have partners on the lending side that make loans, primarily related to affordable housing, community development, revitalization projects throughout our footprint. I would say if I were going to pick one thing that I think some communities are doing particularly well, it is the alignment of the various forms of subsidy from a timing perspective and a getting to a full capital stack perspective. So development is fundamentally binary. We either have enough sources to match all of our uses and we can put a shovel in the ground or swing the hammer on the rehab, or we don't. And so having a project where you have 95% or 98% of the capital stack isn't moving us forward. But often what we see is that the subsidy dollars, so if you think about a typical capital stack, you've got some equity probably coming from the sponsor or from the bank in the form of low-income housing tax credit acquisition. You usually have a big construction loan. And then it used to be that maybe you'd have a form of subsidy, maybe a tax increment financing or some sort of grant dollars. But in today's world, we're seeing deals, almost everything that I see has 5, 6, 7 plus layers of financing in it. And that's a lot of coordination. And what happens is that a lot of that money is coming from the public sector or the quasi-public sector, sometimes from the corporate community, frequently from philanthropy. And everybody has their own program, their own guidelines, and more importantly, their own timeline. And so what happens is if you need to raise $5 million in 5 $1 million increments, you have to apply to a bunch of different places and you have to kind of wait until all that comes. And so the innovation that we've seen in the state local action plan, we highlight the Housing Accelerator Fund in San Francisco. I will say, in the Fifth Third Bank footprint, we've seen great examples of this in both Charlotte, North Carolina and Cincinnati, Ohio, where a variety of interested parties from the public, quasi-public, and private sector have come together and said, we're going to align all of the subsidy dollars or a big chunk of the subsidy dollars to run off the same schedule from a ward perspective, frequently off the same application, which is really helpful. And I think also particularly helpful, oftentimes having kind of a player of last resort who would say, we'll step in and fill the gap so everybody else can follow their program. And so we would say, I think there are some easy ways to do that. If you don't want to give up control, you can just sort of look to align dates on the timeline, make things happen at about the right time. That's helpful. If you're willing to give up a little bit of control and maybe have a common application or even some common decision making, I think that really serves to accelerate things.
Awesome. Thank you, Susan. And then Governor Cox, same question to you. Background and one or two levers, if you pulled them today, to really affect supply and affordability.
Sure, Colin. It's great to see all of you. Spencer Cox, governor of the great state of Utah, care deeply and passionately about this issue, and honored to be here with you. And Mayor, it's great to see you as well, and Susan and others. So look, we there are so many levers I'd love to pull right now, and we pulled several of them. We've probably had 15 bills come through our legislature over the past 3 or 4 years dealing with this, and we still haven't made the kind of dent that we're hoping for. But really, my answer would be pretty simple. I mean, one, I think we all agree with would just be increasing small lot density and in new developments and in infill. It's just it's pure economics. If a piece of land costs $200,000, you're going to put the biggest home you possibly can or apartment building on that you can, versus if I can divide that up and now we've got some economies of scale, I can just build more and more units. The second one is something that we are working on here, and I feel passionate about. We have so many lots that are papered lots that seem to be available, but there's no infrastructure there, and so the infrastructure piece is what unlocks those lots. And so we're working hard to figure out, especially on kind of regionally significant projects, the really big projects, could we use public funding to get the infrastructure there that then allows the developers to do their thing, and so we're figuring out some creative ways to do that, but those are the two big ones for us.
I love it. I love it that we got two big ones from each of you separately from where you sit. That is why we have different seats represented in our co-chairs of our task force. So Governor Cox, I'm actually going to keep it rolling with you. We under your leadership, the state of Utah has set the ambitious goal to build 35,000 additional new starter homes by 2028, which is a pretty remarkable goal, and it's backed by a number of state investments, including a $300 million Utah Homes Investment Partnership. We profiled this in the State and Local Housing Action Plan, but would love for you to talk a bit about how your team got creative to find the money and a bit about your vision behind the program.
Yeah, so we there's not a lot of money just sitting around on trees, and so we did have to get creative. I've got to give credit to Steve Waldrop. One of the best things I did was to hire a attainable housing czar, for lack of a better term, but my senior advisor for housing attainability. And so we when we looked at how we could start investing in these starter homes, we realized that there was really a capital shortage, that a lot of developers were having a hard time because of some of the bank issues a couple of years ago. If they were able to get loans at all, they were really high interest loans, 12% and higher, just didn't make it feasible at all. And so we have every state has a savings fund, a lot of transportation money in those funds, and we convinced the legislature to allow us to use that money, to unlock that money, to lend to developers at low interest loans. We can make almost as much back on interest as we're getting in the short-term markets where we're investing this money anyway. And in the long term, we're getting a lot more. If you look at the return on investment, when someone owns a house and they have their families and they pay property taxes and all those things, it ends up being much better for the economy than anything else we could really do. And so I'm grateful that they allowed us to do that, to give these below market construction loans to incentivize the private sector to start building those starter homes. And just to be clear, so the concept was we would partner with banks, and so we wouldn't be lending, we wouldn't be the only lender. There would be two of us in there, and that they would then they would sell these homes at under $400,000, which right now the median price of housing in Utah is at $500,000. So it's under $400,000 isn't a starter home as most of us kind of thought about it, but that's where we are right now, and it's certainly a great starting point. I will say that we made some changes this last legislative session to allow us to open it up to developing condominiums on state land. We're looking at some of our excess land that is owned by the Department of Transportation to see if we can't incentivize some developers to start building condos. Condos are maybe the new starter homes of the past, so people can start building some equity and get them in at $200,000 dollars, somewhere in that range. So that's a program we're just starting, but we're really excited about.
Well, so Governor, can I be provocative here for a second and say,
Please.
like, if affordability is such a big problem, right, which you note for starter homes, why not just build more apartments that people can rent? Why was it important to you
Sure.
to invest in homes in Utah?
Yeah. So, by the way, we are building a lot of apartments right now, and that is the one area where we have seen some the prices starting to come down. We've seen some softening in the market because we have built so many apartment buildings. But this was really, really important for me for a couple reasons. One, I believe that ownership is what we should all be striving for, and that the American dream has always been based on home ownership. If you look at what we were able to do post World War II in the 40s and 50s, and getting people started along that journey, and how that has worked out for them, all of the numbers show that if you can own property, if you can own real property, the odds of you being able to retire and have a retirement, have some savings, are just exponentially higher. So the first was, it's just better for our people. By the way, it's better in so many ways. We think that the demographic cliff that we're facing as a country is in part because people don't own their homes anymore. A lot of people put off having kids until they own their homes, and if you can't own a home until you're 45, now your odds of having kids, or as many kids as you wanted, goes down. So again, part of the dream, building families, is important. The second reason I focused on this is because there is much less NIMBYism around starter homes than there are other things. And sometimes we've just got to start somewhere. And I can go into a neighborhood and I can make a really strong case. I always ask the question when I'm in front of a crowd: how many of you grew up in or started your own families in a home that was 1,500 square feet or less? And almost every hand in the room goes up. And I always remind them that we turned out okay, and that we were pretty good neighbors. And so by focusing there, we've gotten a lot less NIMBYism. We had some communities that were not allowing building to go forward on apartment buildings or anything else, who are now starting to open up again, and being able to build some small homes, subdivisions that are making a difference.
Awesome. Thank you, Governor. And I love that. Sometimes you just got to start somewhere. And, you really laid out the Utah model there. And so, Mayor Bibb, I'm gonna turn to you to talk a bit about the Cleveland model, right? We profiled Cleveland's pre-purchasing of housing that's built in factories, assembled on sites, modular housing units, as a real innovation that's being used. So I'd love for you to talk about the process of this initiative, how it came about, and how it's going. And you are on mute, my friend.
I'm a millennial and I still can't use Zoom. I got to work on that. So our strategy around modular is not just about filling vacant lots. It's really about making Cleveland the Midwest leader in modular housing manufacturing. And this is why I'm really excited about this work for a couple of reasons. Number one, we're really pairing two key pillars of our economic strategy called the Cleveland Era as a city. The first is our site readiness fund for good jobs. So my first year in office, I allocated $50 million, spun out a fund to convert 1,000 acres of brownfield vacant land and make that vacant land shovel-ready job sites to attract and retain the jobs of the future back to our city. Because when I took office, there were literally zero shovel-ready sites for business development in my city. Now we have nearly 400 acres under development. And one of the companies we're trying to lure is, in fact, a modular housing developer. So we are already in the process of selecting one manufacturer. We have 4 finalists right now that are competing with each other. And across those 4 finalists, they're all doing market pilots right now in the city of Cleveland. So we're really excited about this. By 2026, we'll deliver 20 more homes as part of this market pilot, really building the proof point that we can scale this industry quick and fast in our city. And I really think that on-site manufacturing of housing is one of the surest things we can do to address our housing crisis in the country.
Thanks, Mayor. And I think one of the things that's interesting for me, right, is hearing the Cleveland model and the Utah model, and they're two different ways to sort of take a bite out of this apple, but they sort of blend the economic, the social, and the creative uses of land and capital and partnership. And so, Susan, I'm going to turn it to you, right, as the private sector co-chair, right? Both of these fellows talked about money, right, and they talked about partnership with the private sector. Where do you see banks and financial institutions playing a bigger role in driving production and affordability?
Sure. So I think there's lots of opportunity for that to happen, right? I think that the pieces have to fit together, right? And I think that's a place where we see some real struggle and tension, right? As everybody has been rolling out new and really awesome, innovative things, they don't always fit together in, with the banking sector, which is, for obvious reasons, safety and soundness, fairly highly regulated, comes with lots of rules, right? Not that there's no flexibility, but I think that where we can really engage is in finding ways to bring those sources of capital together in a way that fits. And I tell people frequently, most bankers, we're fairly friendly. And if you're putting in place a program that's going to help us get loans closed and investments made, we're really happy to contribute to that. So we might contribute financially to the fund, which we do all the time, en masse, but we also might help structure the fund in a way that would work and make sense, whether that's, the way the tax incentives are structured and how that actually becomes valuable to filling the gap, not just flowing to the developer as additional profit, or whether it's the way that the way that the collateral works or what has to be bridged, those kinds of questions. And so I would always encourage all of us to work together to create things that work, because I think the federal government has a tremendous amount of money. State and local governments less flexible, right? And the private capital numbers are just overwhelmingly huge, right? And so we can work together to do this and to balance so that everybody can be in the place that they want to be in from a risk and return perspective. And managing those risks and returns so that they're appropriate and everybody's winning, I think, is really kind of the name of the game in today's world, where everybody really has to come to the table.
Yeah, thanks for that, Susan. And you mentioned bringing all the different parties together to the table. And so, Mayor Bibb, I'm going to ask you to talk a bit about the Cleveland Housing Investment Fund, right? We talked about this in the state and local housing action plan as a real model that brought together public, private, and civic. So we'd love to hear you talk a bit about how that partnership came together and how you brought the folks together around the table.
Well, I think Governor Cox can appreciate this sentiment as the chief executive of the great state of Utah and as the chief executive of the great city of Cleveland, Ohio. I think there's anything we're learning now with this kind of federal retrenchment from our states and cities is that Washington's not coming to save us. We got to save ourselves. And we need to look at not just our balance sheet, but the balance sheets of our private sector partners to really support us, to really address our housing needs. And so really excited that we're partnering with LISC, a national nonprofit that I know many of you on this call are very, very familiar with, and our hometown bank, Key Bank, on this effort. Through them, we are launching, or have launched rather, a $100 million housing investment fund. City of Cleveland put $18 million of capital already towards this effort. The goal is to bring online 3,000 more units of affordable and workforce housing over the next 10 years to the city of Cleveland. And as any mayor or even governor would tell you, we love stealing each other's ideas. So I stole this idea from what LISC did with Mayor Duggan in Detroit. And just really excited that we have a really intentional, thoughtful, public-private partnership, solving some key financing gaps to get some of these housing projects online as quickly as possible.
Thanks, Mayor. And Governor, I'm going to turn to you since the mayor brought up the power of chief executives here. One of the things that you have emphasized is the power of strong communication in winning support for density and affordability. I think everyone on this call can appreciate housing is hard to build, it's hard to talk about, it's hard to win support for. So can you talk to us a bit about how state and local leaders can build broader public buy-in and support for high density and middle housing?
Yeah, well, again, I so appreciate Mayor Justin and the great work that they're doing in Cleveland and just the vision. And he's right, we do steal ideas from each other, and that's how it should be. One of the things I love about this issue is that it is truly bipartisan, and we're certainly seeing that. There's been a great focus happening on the left that I've been very impressed with as I talk to my fellow governors across the country. We had a roundtable a little over, well, I guess it's been close to 2 years now, a year and a half ago. And if you listen to the governors talking about this issue, and if you'd come from another country or another planet, you never would have been able to tell who were the Republicans in the room and who were the Democrats in the room. And so this is why I think communication is so important. The kind of the NIMBY backlash to what needs to be done, what has to be done, usually comes from people who are scared of the unknown and what could be. And we're always presented with false choices that we have to choose between growth and affordability or a high quality of life. And that's just not true. At least it doesn't have to be true. Those are choices themselves. It's why I talk about infrastructure so much. Density has nothing to do with quality of life. If you have high density and strong infrastructure, your quality of life is high. Now, I will admit that if you have high density and low infrastructure, then the quality of life can go down. But that's why we have to be smart about what we do. And so I just feel strongly that it's our job to inform people, to be courageous about it, to stand up to kind of the angry mobs sometimes, and then help them understand why it's in their best interest as well. Why, to remind them of the first time they owned a home, the first the first type of home that they lived in, to remind them of our kids and grandkids. That's really who we're building for, and it just changes the calculus when we're able to do that.
Yeah, well, absolutely. And like housing is, everyone knows housing, and it's also very easy to get real wonky real quick. But one of the other interesting things about housing, and Susan, I'm going to turn to you for this question, is it is both a personal good and an economic good. And so, as someone in the private sector, someone who thinks about investments that you're making, right? The American housing market is a little wacky right now. Things are kind of all over the place, around the country, around neighborhoods and cities. So I'd love for you to talk to us a bit about, how you go about evaluating what places are doing well and ready for investments, and what local leaders, what state leaders can do to sort of think through getting places ready for investment.
Sure. This is something that we care a lot about. So at Fifth Third, we have a place-based strategy. So in addition to sort of all the typical lending and investment we do throughout the footprint, we have a very specific focus on a place-based initiative, which we launched in 2021 in partnership with enterprise community partners. And this has worked at the neighborhood level. So it's not, Charlotte, it's the historic West End in Charlotte. It's not Cincinnati, it's the Avondale neighborhood in Cincinnati. And the concept here was basically to say, what if we deployed the bank's resources, not just financial capital, but also human capital, labor, expertise, community connections, financial education, literacy, philanthropy, branches, in a concentrated geographic area. And so as a part of that, then we had to say, well, okay, now we're not looking for a one-off deal. Like, we're not looking at just the economics of a particular multifamily development. We are looking at what it would mean to work with a community. And our philosophy here is that, communities have to be grown from within, right? And so in order, if you just flood a community, particularly a lower moderate income community, with capital, you run a lot of risks in terms of breaking down what makes that community what it is, right? And so that's never been our model. Our model has been a local partnership model, where we try and support communities from within to grow and experience transformational change. And so if you're taking that approach, and I think this is where you're going with the question, then the question is sort of how would you look at a community and say, this community is ready for investment? And I will say that there are a bunch of people who are a lot smarter than I am who've done some really amazing research here. If you know, obviously our partners at Enterprise, I think we really like the Center for Community Investment and their capital absorption framework. I personally really like the Appalachian Funders Network. They actually have a checklist you can use to evaluate if your community, whether that's a neighborhood or a small town, is ready for investment. But there's some great metrics out there to look at. I think if I were going to pick the things that were most important to us, I'd say, an agreed upon plan. You want to have a shared vision. You want to make sure that people are going, kind of loosely speaking, the same direction. You want to have leadership, and that can be elected leadership, that can be community leadership, but somebody who's going to bring that sort of vision. And then a day-to-day person who can handle the nuts and bolts. I think in a couple of the communities where we first started working, people in the bank would say to me, why haven't you done anything there? And I would say, because there's nobody that I can talk to who, there's nobody there on the other end of the phone in the community who understands what a pro forma looks like. So you have to have somebody either on staff or as a consultant or advisor who can help with that piece. And then I think if we want sustainable development, I think that's what we all really want. It's not about putting up a building. It's about putting up a building that's going to thrive in a neighborhood that's going to be successful for generations. Then we also have to look at market demand and the market demand functions and really understand kind of what is there. There's very little in commercial real estate that operates on an if you build it, they will come model. Usually it's people want to be there and we need to build it. Is how you get something that's sustainable. And I would say, a little less of the multifamily side, but particularly if you're looking to build single family for sale residential housing, demonstrating that market is extremely important. And one of the best ways we've seen people do that is to partner with credit counseling agencies so that people have gone, you have specific buyers who have gone through the process, are pre-qualified for loans at certain price points, have targeted certain communities or neighborhoods where they would like to live. And all that's sort of pre-done, because then you really, going back to my de-risking project, you really de-risked capital investment for both the developer and any lender or investor in that, because you've demonstrated the demand up front, rather than just saying, hey, this is a nice piece of land we have and we'd like to build some single family homes here and we think the market will follow. If you can demonstrate that with actual names of people, that I think is really helpful. So.
Thanks, Susan. And I think, we have 15 minutes left. So if you have questions that you want to make sure we bring to the panel, please put your questions in the Q&A part of the chat. I think I'll say one of the interesting things here, right, is the different perspectives on the same issue, from a governor, from a mayor, from a lender, on what is fundamentally an issue that cuts across a lot of different places. Mayor, I want to turn to you, because one of the things we haven't talked about as much is, the homelessness side of housing and, what happens for our most vulnerable members of our community. And I know in the state and local housing action plan, one of the things we profiled was a Home for Every Neighbor initiative. And so I would love for you to talk a bit about how this fits in with your broader housing vision and the Cleveland Housing Investment Funds, and how these efforts are working in concert to drive systemic change in your city.
Yeah, absolutely. Going back to my prior comments about how sometimes red tape gets in the way, although good intentions can lead to more delays and nightmares, where families and folks struggling with drug addiction or alcohol abuse, or someone who is a member of the LGBTQ community who wants to be in a shelter with their partner who can't because of restrictions, the only place to go is on our streets in a tent or living in a car. And so we said to ourselves, let's just deploy a housing first approach. Let's cut the red tape. Let's meet people where they are. Let's guarantee their rent for a year. And as we get them in a home that gives them dignity, that gives them hope, we're going to pair them with a social worker and the social supports they need to get the second chance that they deserve. Because I don't know about y'all, but for the grace of God, that could have been me as a kid growing up, or one of us growing up, or we're one healthcare incident or one job not going our way. Well, that could be us right now. And so by deploying this housing first approach, we've housed over 200 individuals who are living on our streets in homes. We've closed 50 encampments as well across the city, across all 17 wards in the city of Cleveland. And now we're seeing a model for the country on how to solve our unsheltered population. So it's aligned with a good policy, good land policy and zoning reforms, but also good capital investment as well too, to really solve, I think, one of our nation's most vexing public policy problems. And if we can do it in Cleveland, we can do it anywhere across this country.
Well, and Mayor, I want to pick up on one of the things you said, which is we don't want regulation to get in the way. And, Governor, I want to turn to you on this because Utah has really been a state level leader on regulatory changes to sort of improve production writ large. And I would love for you to talk about, how you envision the state's role in regulatory reform, how you balance the sort of tension between state and local control here, which I know many folks on this call have an appreciation of.
Yeah, look, this is the big question, right? This is the hard one, and I'll be frank with you. I mean, it's one I'm still working my way through. I should say, by way of disclosure, that I am a former city councilman and a former mayor of a small town, very small town, and so my roots go back to local governance and local control, and I truly do believe that historically the best decisions are made at the local level. Now, I also, though, I think we have to be honest about the way that incentives work, and some of the policies, some pieces of legislation that we put in place have made it really hard on local leaders to even make those decisions, because it's even if they want to approve a new subdivision, approve a new project, and they do the right thing, then immediately there's a there's a petition that gets circulated, and next thing you know, they've got enough signatures. Now we're having a vote, a referendum on that decision, and the project can get overturned, and then they usually lose their seat. And so that's not a very good way to encourage what we need to be done. At least that's how it works here in the state of Utah. And so I do believe that the state has had to take and should take a larger role, because this isn't a single community issue. This is a statewide issue, at least in Utah. It's not that way everywhere, but in Utah, every single, no matter how small, no matter what corner of the state, we have an affordability crisis. Every single town in Utah right now. So that's one reason I think we've had to play a greater role. The second piece of this that I think matters is we've tried not to completely usurp that control, but to look at where the state does have a direct interest. And so we've been working on station area plans where the state is investing millions of dollars in mass transit. We're not going to let you have acre lots or no density around a transportation hub. That just doesn't make any sense. So the state's going to require density in those areas. Again, where we have infrastructure, we should be able to require density, especially where the state has made that type of investment, and so that's a real piece of it. But I will just end with this. I feel like I have a moral obligation to our kids, our grandkids, to those who are experiencing homelessness, as Mayor Bibb talked about. By the way, there is a direct correlation, I believe it's causation. If you just look at the average price of a home in any state and then look at the homelessness in that state, it will match almost perfectly. The more expensive housing is in general, all housing is homelessness policy. And so we have to do everything we can to bring those prices down. And if that means that I have to be the bad guy, I tell mayors all the time, let me be the bad guy. I can tell you, I could give you newspaper clippings just in the last month, several city council meetings where a mayor or a city council person said, we have to approve this. If we don't, The governor and the legislature are going to make life worse for us, and they're going to take over, and they're going to make these decisions for us, and we don't want that to happen. And I'm really excited to see those decisions being made and me being the bad guy.
Oh, well, Governor, I appreciate that answer, and I want to, be cognizant of time, and so I'm going to open a few questions to all the panelists to talk about, because I could just listen to you guys talk for time. But one of my first questions for you, which comes from the chat, is like what types of we've talked about state, we've talked about local, right? There's the state and local housing action plan, but what types of federal support or assistance are you looking for that would be helpful from our folks in DC or otherwise?
I'm happy to start. I think one, as a mayor, really concerned about the president proposing to eliminate all funding for CDBG. CDBG is vital for cities across this country, not just big cities like Cleveland, but for small towns like Massillon and Warren, Ohio as well too. We need those funds to support infrastructure, housing, economic development, and small businesses in our respective communities. I think secondly, there's some great things we can do at HUD to free up regulations that currently right now have lengthy approval processes, which delay construction and drive up expenses. And by loosening up some of these restrictions at HUD, we can attract more private capital, which leads to increased housing supply at the state and local level. I would also say the Home Fund. The Home Fund is a vital federal program that provides critical gap financing to create more affordable housing for low-income families. And so having more home funds available will help us finance the construction, purchase, and rehabbing of more affordable housing for both rent and home ownership. So it's getting rid of the red tape at HUD, maintain or increase the funding levels for core programs like CDBG and the Home Fund. And then on the Home Fund, for example, every dollar of home funding we get at the local level attracts another $4 in private and public investment as well too. So these are some things we can do immediately to address the housing crisis.
Yeah, thanks. And I would just add, I agree with that. By the way, as a former mayor, CDBG from a small town of 1,200 people was really, really important to us. And so I'll just kind of underline what the mayor said there. A couple others. I would just note that I saw somebody today that said that most state and local policies restrict supply, and most federal policies boost demand. And so that ends up just driving costs up on both sides. So I think it's important that we fix that on both ends. I would just add this one of the things that we were hoping for out of the last big beautiful bill, or whatever we're calling it. There was a proposal there that got removed. Sadly, it was mishandled. But being able to use federal lands within and right next to our cities, especially in places like Utah in the West, where there's so much federal land, we were never had any intention of millions of acres or big beautiful places that would have been sold off to the highest bidder at all. These are literally kind of wasted pieces of property with nothing happening on them, where we could increase supply. So that's one thing that we'll continue to work with the federal government and hopefully be able to find some common ground there. I would just underscore anything dealing with permitting and the timelines that it takes with the federal government. While I appreciate the goals, there's other people have written about this. Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson, where they talked about we tend to put all of our ideals and goals into housing. We want to solve all the world's problems in housing, and we exacerbate that problem. So for example, we want cleaner air, so we put these air restrictions in. You have to add equipment to some of these projects that then slows the projects way down, it makes it much more expensive, and we have to to ask the question, okay, so yes, we could have had some air filtration systems put on this building that are much more expensive, but now the building isn't even built. And so instead of that, now we have people camping under an overpass, which, there are some trade-offs, and we have to understand that we can't have all of those trade-offs. We just have to build some of this stuff. And I would rather have people in a home that isn't perfect than in a tent under an overpass.
Well, that is I love that answer, Governor Cox. And I want to, you have 3 minutes left here. And Susan, I see you've come on, so I'll let you take this question. Yeah.
I just wanted to say that I think it would be we would be remiss if we did not acknowledge our friends in Washington for the increases in the low-income housing tax credit and the permanency of the new market tax credit, which are both will be helpful in terms of being able to drive new production of both affordable and workforce-related housing. And then, I think in addition to everything mentioned by Governor Cox and by Mayor Bibb, we believe there were also some potential changes with respect to opportunity zone funds that were under discussion early in the Big Beautiful Bill process that we think would be additive to making those work better for the housing situation.
Well, and I love this question. It's sort of the penultimate question because it is, right? It is a state and local action plan, but as with everything in America, it's a partnership between the feds, the states, the cities, the private sector to actually get stuff built, right? And I think that is a good frame to leave us on, but I want to turn it to our panelists for a final word, right? We're 1 year into this National Housing Crisis Task Force. And so I would love for you each to reflect on 1 year in some of the biggest learnings or takeaways that you have that you're taking into this next year as you all work in your own communities, in your own sectors to really address the housing crisis that we are confronting as a country. And Mayor Bibb, you came off mute first, so I'll go to you.
I'll be brief. I think we know the challenges, we know the solutions, and as my late grandmama told me, well done is better than well said. So right now I have an execution first mentality, right? We know what the agenda is. We just have to do it fast, do it at scale, and do it right to solve the problem. And I think we all have that mentality. We can solve this crisis together as a country.
Yeah, I would underscore the same. I vote for Mayor Bibb's grandma. She was right. That's exactly what we need to do. I mean, the thing I'll take away is that this problem is universal. It's been so fun and yet depressing to hear what's happening in Ohio, in a big city in Ohio, versus even rural towns in Utah, that we're all in this together. But there were choices we made that got us into this, and there are choices we can make to get us out of it. And it really is about doing and building. And I still believe in us, and that's the thing I'm taking away from this group, that we can do this together.
All right, Susan, you get the last word.
I was going to say, I will second both of those. And, I think I will add to that I have been incredibly impressed to learn about how broad the issue is in the private sector. I think for a long time, a lot of people in the financial services group were talking about housing and more innovative financing structures. And clearly the public sector has been long engaged. But one of my favorite things about the task force has been meeting people, whether that's developers or architecture firms or consulting firms, who have been really doing amazing, innovative things focused on driving down the cost of production, thinking about issues involving conversion, working to really help all of us do this work better. And I think I'm very inspired by that on a regular basis.
Well, thank you for those closing words. And I want to thank everyone who showed up to this webinar to hear our wonderful panelists, and thank our panelists for not only their words today, but their actions, right? And I think that is what I'm walking away from this, do, as Mayor Bibb and his grandma said. And so for those of you who want to read about our playbook of action so you can go do in your community, go to nationalhousingcrisis.org. You will find the state and local housing action plan. Follow us on LinkedIn and Thank you for your time and your attention to this, and thank you to our panelists for your leadership on this issue. It's, and thank you for co-chairing this task force as we go into our next year. And with that, everyone have a good evening.